Hello, everyone, and welcome to Ladder Daily Digest. I'm Gene Judson, and on with me today is Maven Brodie, and we're here to introduce a new, an exciting podcast that's been going on for a little while, new to us a little bit, and let's bring our guests on.
All right, here we go. So
We
we've
have
got
Sarah.
Sarah and Mason, and the podcast is Unpacking Mormonism, which we can see up behind Mason's head here, it looks like, right?
Should I do a Vanna White thing? There you go. Woo!
There you go. Okay, why don't you guys go ahead and give us and the audience your introduction.
Hi, we are Sarah and Mason Westbrook. We are the hosts of Unpacking Mormonism and Other Religious Trauma. And we're excited. Thank you so much for your invitation today. Mason, do you want me to start or do you want to start?
You always start, Sarah. You might as well start.
Okay, sounds great. So I am a mental health therapist. I have a master's degree in mental health counseling from Walden University. And Mason and I were both born and raised Mormon. We have that normal, typical Mormon story. Our parents, or my parents, met at BYU. So they were BYU I-doers. We did all the normal things. Mason served as a bishop. And one of the things that occurred when I entered the mental health field is that I would sit in session with my Mormon clients and I would notice that they would stall out in therapy after about 6 weeks of sessions. And I couldn't figure this out because my non-LDS clients would not have the same stall out. So I knew that it wasn't me. It wasn't the way that I was practicing. It wasn't the interventions that I was employing. And then I started to struggle with my testimony. I'd always struggled with the doctrines of polygamy. Ever since I was really small. I'd had a lot of trauma in my childhood. My father has since been diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder. And so there was a lot of trauma in my childhood. I'd always struggled with polygamy, but Mason has a very different experience with Mormonism. Mason's story was very happy, very little trauma in Mormonism. And so for me, it was, I'm going to stay stalwart because it was what was best for our family. And then Mason was called to be the bishop while also serving in the military. And then Mason went to Afghanistan as part of the United States military and was not released as the bishop. He continued to serve as the bishop while in Afghanistan of our ward in Killeen, Texas. And then he came back. And one of the things that became really interesting is that as our ward members were struggling with some really challenging life events, he would come to me and he would say, "Hey, Sarah, I've got a couple in the ward. This is what's going on. Give me some ideas of some interventions because I don't know what to do." And the normal Mormon read your scriptures, pay your tithing is just not cutting it. So long story.
Quick shout out to Mason then. I just wanted to say that's really neat. I know normally the trope is not that it's a good thing for the bishop to be telling the wife because then it's, it's a gossip thing. But because of your expertise, I think that's really, I just think that's really great that Mason was looking for something professional, to actually help.
That's right.
And
also,
it
Mason,
is just, go ahead.
How much training did you have as a new bishop in helping people?
Does that work?
Yeah.
There was no training. There was certainly no training when it came to counseling. Certainly no training when it came to dealing with things that people bring to a bishop, pornography, marital problems, affairs, all that stuff, all of which I saw. And I only served as a bishop for 2 years. So I didn't see a ton of all that, but I did see all of those things at least a couple of times. And for me, it was a huge blessing because, for one, she knows how to be confidential because it's just part of her job. And I was able to asked those questions without disclosing who that was, or even giving her any indication who it might be. So for me, it was great to have that resource there, because otherwise I would have struggled, and I still probably did give some lousy advice as a bishop, because you just don't know. But I gave a lot less of it than a lot of people would have, because I knew that I had that resource. And then she, cued me into a couple of books that were really helpful as well. And so, it was a big deal in, I think, and I hope, providing better counsel to people that come to a bishop expecting him to know. And we don't. We just don't.
Yeah.
Well, then,
I'm going to bring
Mason,
Sarah back on.
Yeah, well, because our
sorry.
stake president, Mason, when Mason got called to be the bishop, the stake president did tell Mason to counsel with his wife. But Mason did not tell me who the couples were, who the members of the ward were that were seeking that counsel. But also, I think our proximity to the military and the military's need, and I mean, the military has done a lot of work to try and eliminate the stigma for seeking mental health interventions, especially for the families, kind of helped reduce a lot of that idea that the bishop knew better. So we were not in a Utah ward. And I mean, there were times over our military career where there were very few, priesthood holders present in the ward at all. I know that when we were in North Carolina, one of the wards had like maybe 5 men in the ward at a time, because they were all deployed. And so it was a very different environment where people pulled together very differently. So anyway, we go ahead.
So from what I'm seeing so far, I just want to make sure I'm on track. So it seems like there's kind of 2 fronts that are maybe that we're building towards this podcast. The one was your personal practice and what you were seeing with your LDS versus non-LDS clients. And then through your husband's bishop calling, you're also getting kind of issues and feedback from there. Am I following along correctly so far? It seems like there's kind of 2 fronts there.
Yeah, but even I think where it came through was even when my husband was giving these LDS individuals, so the books that he's talking about was, I gave him the Gottman method books. So John and Julie Gottman are basically the gold standard for marital counseling interventions when it comes to communication issues. So I gave him like the counselor's curriculum and coached him on how to give that for clients and trained him on that. I gave him a lot of the Brene Brown stuff. I gave him a lot of neuroscience things. Even when he was providing that to members of the church, they would stall out. What I was seeing was this block where LDS clients, it didn't matter if it was coming from their priesthood leader or a licensed professional, they couldn't seem to progress, meaning that they were stuck in this cycle of perpetual inadequacy, which led to chronic anxiety and depression that they just couldn't seem to heal from, whereas my non-LDS clients were getting better. They were maintaining that growth. At that point, I mean, by the time I left Colleen, I'd been in practice either under supervision or out of supervision for 6 years. So I'd been following several of my clients. I'm doing my own internal checks, because the only way to find out if you're really effective as a counselor is to do your own internal, checking in with your clients for years. How are you maintaining? How are you feeling? What are your anxiety levels? What are your depression levels? How is your marriage? How is your relationship? My LDS clients not getting better. My non-LDS clients thriving and doing better in the areas that we had worked on. And it was consistent. My LDS clients who had left the church were getting better. My LDS clients staying in the church were not getting better. And that really started to just crumble and break away at my testimony of the truthfulness of the church.
How did you come to figure out what was it based on the truthfulness or more of, I would assume, the behavioral models and things that, you know, our practices and how we act in the church would be part of that block?
So for years, I said, I hate the culture. I love the doctrines. I said that I was a member with a lot of caution tape. I had somebody say, is the caution tape around the church or around you? And I was like, ooh, good question. And I couldn't answer it. Long story short, I had a complete nervous breakdown, went to an inpatient psych unit and sat there for a week saying, what can go in my life? And the only thing was the church. But then I came home and I said, but what if I'm wrong? What if I'm wrong? What if I'm wrong? And I had a
What
client.
do you mean what can go?
So Mason and I are adoptive parents. We have 7 children. We did the normal Mormon thing. So I struggle with infertility. We have 4 of our 7 children are adopted. 3 of them have severe special needs. And we have, so our 19-year-old has schizophrenia. And then we have 2 children on the autism spectrum. And so I was burning out. Mason was gone with the military all the time. He was a bishop.
Yeah.
We were separated a lot. I was running my own private practice.
So is it like letting something go? Like what can go? What can I stop doing?
Right. I was an early morning seminary teacher. I was the gospel doctrine teacher. I was the young women's president. I was the primary president. Like, we were in high demand callings. And because we were in the quote unquote mission field, we were both in high demand callings at the same time, raising children, special needs children. I was going to school for my master's degree. Then I was working, raising special needs children. I burned out. I mean, I burned out.
Honestly.
It was insane.
Yeah. Cause I'll come up again. I'll bring us all up, but I mean, I'm an Army brat. So I understand like the moving, and I've had my father, he also went to Afghanistan. So did my brother. So yeah, I get the military family thing, but there were just 3 of us in my family. So I cannot imagine with, you know, first of all, more kids in general, plus the special needs, plus you having, being a bishop, Mason, that is an incredibly demanding calling, that my family, I guess, was privileged. Now I see it that my dad was not ever called as a bishop during these times. Bless my mother. She did do a lot herself. And then, working on your master's, it's no wonder you were falling apart, because there's no way I think I could have done like 2 of those things at the same time. So the fact that you had so many, I just want to say bravo.
Mason did his medical school on top of that as well. So Mason,
and medical school.
Yeah.
Mason, oh my goodness.
Mason is a nurse anesthetist. So he did his doctorate in anesthesia at the same time that I was finishing my master's degree.
I think
I can see why you guys are a good partnership. I think you both seem like really good go-getters. I'm sorry.
I think no, that's all right. I don't think people really know what they can do until they're in that situation. Mm-hmm. Like, she talks about what could go. You're talking about special needs kids, can't do anything about that. You're talking about, I'm separated by the military, really nothing that we can do about that. We were financially strapped because we were running 2 households. I was a bishop. I was released shortly thereafter because I was trying to travel back and forth and just be with my family as much as possible. So there's a lot that's coming that there's nothing you can do about it. And so for her, and this is kind of where our journey is different. She kind of came to this point of seeing, hey, my Mormon clients are stalling out. What's going on here? And that kind of led her to saying something's not healthy here. And of course, with her training, she was able to kind of figure out what those things were. Then when she decided, hey, I got to let this go, and she started to investigate some of the truth claims and read the CES letter, those kinds of things, for her, it was almost like, thank you. Thank you. I now have a legitimate reason right here to just say, I'm out. So, I'm done. And
right. So Mason, I'm going to pause you. Right, I'm going to pause you, Mason, and then I'm going to let you pick back up. So what happened for me is I went into the psych unit, and it was the only thing I can let go right now is the church. So when I said, okay, I'm not going to church, my initial response to Mason was, I have to step back. I think there's something wrong with the church, but I don't really know what it is. I had identified that there was a lot of what we call spiritual bypassing. Like we're handing all these things over to God, and we're not dealing with anything at its core. But I was still too afraid to let go of the doctrines. And it was mostly the doctrine of eternal family. I was terrified of losing, and not my family of origin as much as my husband and my adopted children. Because I had to fight to get my family, because I could not get pregnant. And then I had several miscarriages and went through those infertility treatments. And so for me, I was terrified of, if I fuck this up, I'm going to lose my husband and children, and I cannot lose them. And that's what kept me hanging on in Mormonism for so long, despite identifying all of this toxic stuff along the way. I took a couple of weeks off after getting out of the psych hospital just to, because I couldn't put two sentences together. So when I came back, I had a very reduced schedule, and it was really, I don't know, serendipitous, divine intervention, whatever you want to call it. But I got this brand new client. They were a mixed faith couple. And I have the wife tell me, I will not see you unless you can be open-minded, because you're an LDS therapist, and I won't see an LDS therapist who's not open-minded. And my standard is, look, if you give me something to read, I will read it, but my capacity is only about 3 hours a week. And I said, look, I will read whatever you give me, but I can only give you 3 hours a week. Like that's all I've got right now. And what she gave me, she said, if you can read this and you can be open-minded about it, then I will proceed with counseling with you. Otherwise, you have to give me a referral to a counselor that's not going to try and convince me that I'm wrong in leaving the Mormon church. And I said, okay, great. And what she gave me was the CES letter. And I ended up reading the CES letter in one sitting. It was the only thing I could focus on. And it took me about 2 years to focus on anything else. After that nervous breakdown, the only thing I could read was the CES letter. And then I followed enough of the source material in the CES letter to determine that Jeremy Reynolds was a reliable author who had, that those source material was legitimate. I didn't follow all of them, but I followed probably 70% of them to go, okay, this is legit. That's the only thing I focused on. And for me, it was like a permission slip to say, okay, letting go of Mormonism is healthy. And I've never looked back. And, and I feel really bad for that client, because unfortunately the husband was not willing to work on the relationship unless the wife was willing to be Mormon. Like there was no working on that relationship because of the mixed faith thing. But what I gained, and unfortunately, I felt bad because I could not help that marriage grow. Again, that LDS client stalled out. But for me, I read that CES letter and it was a permission slip. And so I sat down with Mason and said, I don't think the church is true. And I gave the CES letter to Mason, and that's where his journey out came. Yeah. But for me, it was, I'm done. And I never looked back, never worried about, like, my fear released and I was good.
Yeah.
So my journey out was similar to what I would expect most people. Somebody gave me information. In this case, it was my wife. I did all the wrong things. I responded all the wrong ways.
By wrong, you mean typical.
I responded all the typical ways too, yes, but all the wrong ways, yes. I think that they're unfortunately more typical than they ought to be, but yes. The only time I think that I've ever been cruel to my wife was during that time period. And part of it was I was just worried. So we were still separated. She went out and got a tattoo, which of course, like, separated, whoa, oh my gosh.
Separated because of the Army. Not because of marital stuff. Yes. No. Yeah. So what happened is the Army confused our military orders. I got sent to, I moved to Missouri. He stayed in Texas, and then he caught up later. Keep going, Mason.
I think you just took over my story. I'm done. Hold on. I just need some time here. Just some time. Yes, we were separated for the military. We ended up moving our family early because our schizophrenic son was about to start high school. We thought we had military orders. We did the number one bad thing, you move before you have orders. And so we ended up separated for about 11 months. It was better for everybody, really, except for maybe us, because we just weren't together. And so she went out and got a tattoo. She had a nervous breakdown. I was mostly just really worried about her. It wasn't so much the tattoo as it was just, I'm concerned. She told me that she didn't even realize where she was until about halfway through the tattoo. So it was kind of those, like, I'm just worried for you and for your mental health and what's going on. You know, if you don't know where you are, you just show up in a tattoo parlor. Well, where else are you just going to show up and you don't know what's going on? So I was mostly just scared. But then, of course, there's all the fear that goes along with leaving the church. You know, when an organization has your salvation in their hands, you're going to respond with a lot of fear. And that's what was going on. I was just afraid. It wasn't until essentially she threatened divorce if I didn't actually pay attention to the material. She has never encouraged me to leave the church. She's never encouraged me to step away, to take breaks if that's not what I wanted to do. She only wanted me to actually look at the material and recognize and validate the fact that for her, there are real issues. And that was probably the best thing that I could do with my life. And it didn't lead me out of the church, at least not at that point in time. It was just a way for me to recognize, you know what, there are some serious things here, and I can understand why they're a problem for you. And I'm going to respect that. Was
part of your typical response that you didn't want to hear about it at first?
Of course. Oh, yeah. Yeah, of course. Or, silly things like, well, if the gospel topic essays are on the LDS.org, then LDS.org must have been hacked. I mean, it sounds so ridiculous, but it was like the first thing that I said. If that stuff is on there, then obviously it needs to be fixed. And it's just
You're not the only one.
Right. I know I'm not the only one, but from this vantage point, from this vantage point, it just sounds so ridiculous to think that that's the case, and to not take the time to read it, to not take the time to investigate, because we just don't want to know the sticky, icky issues. And so my journey out was probably more typical of what I think most people go through. You get some information, you pursue it. You're like, this isn't okay. You deal with it, and so on. It was a little bit easier for me because, frankly, my wife was already out. Like, I wasn't worried about this is going to tear my family apart. In fact, not investigating was going to tear my family apart. So I didn't have that issue. And I know a lot of people deal with that too. Just like, I can't, what do I do with this? Because it's going to hurt my wife, or it's going to hurt my husband. It's going to tear our family apart. And so that was our journey. And then as we looked around and she looked at, what do I want to do with this? And she started talking about a podcast. She started talking about writing her book. It was really what's missing out there. And for her, she had this special niche that she wanted to pull in, where we can talk about the mental health implications of high demand religions and what they do. We just did recently, but one of the things that we had really a lot of fun with was we took Luna Lindsay
Corbin's book, Recovering Agency.
Yeah.
And we broke it down into like 11 or 12 episodes of high demand religions and why they are like a cult. Whether or not you call them a cult isn't all that important, but why they're like a cult. And really just the mental health issues, because when you look at a cult, it's not their material that's a problem necessarily. It's the way that they ingrain it. Say that again. Nobody ever thinks they're in a cult. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. We don't see it from the inside. Usually you have to be able to see it from the outside. And it's really the way that they suck you in with the things that they do. Not so much the message. There's a lot of good things in Mormonism, but there's also a lot of bad things, especially in the way that they keep you involved. And so we really wanted to kind of provide this place, because at the time, the only ones I was really aware of, Mormon Stories, where you're just talking about people's journeys, Mormonism Live, where you're really addressing some of the issues and getting deep down into what they are. And we wanted to kind of talk about, well, what are the implications of this for people's health? How do you, if you want to stay in the church, how do you really address the icky, sticky things and find a healthy way to still be involved in the organization? Or if you want to get out of the church, how do you recognize what's been going on so that you can walk away and be healthy in that process? So that leads us into what was the point?
Yeah.
One thing I remember when I first stumbled upon Unpacking Mormonism and Other Religious Trauma was that I really appreciated Sarah's conversational style, and she was bringing technical aspects into like
expertise,
real life, right?
Yes.
And then I felt that Mason's commentary sort of represented all the lay persons.
Yeah, the audience.
So he can contribute like some questions that maybe I would have, but as a viewer, I couldn't ask the question. And that's what I felt that Mason's value was.
Right. And so that was our goal, Gene.
What was your first podcast like?
It was really boring.
Sarah went back and listened to it. It was boring simply because we were talking about us, just telling our stories in a little bit longer form than what we're going for today. And then what was our purpose in the podcast? A couple of things that were really important is we did not want to attack character. That happens far too often on both sides of the argument. So we didn't want to talk about character. We wanted to talk about the issues and help people be more educated about them. It was fun, really. With all the busyness.
I assume you also wanted to be, sorry.
Oh,
I assume you also wanted to be like TBM friendly, right? And so I'm using acronyms. So TBM means True Believing Mormon, or a variation of that. So I assume that was also a consideration. That, how do you navigate that?
When we started, Mason was TBM. And so our first season is actually really unique because you literally watch Mason go through the cognitive bias and dissonance. And by the end of the season, you literally watch the transformation of Mason go, I just can't anymore. But in what I'm going to say is a really healthy way, because you don't have me ever saying, what's the matter with you? You're dumb, you're stupid. Because my goal, in my head, sometimes I'm going to be honest, in my head, I was like, Mason, why can't you see this? Which I think is normal. And of course, you're going to have on both sides, both those who are still in the faith and those who are out, like, why can't you see it the way that I see it? Because that's a normal human nature thing to think, the way that I see it makes the most sense to me. Why can't you see things the way that I see it? Why can't you crawl inside my brain and see it the way that I see it? When we started our podcast, our primary goal was, because one of the things I love about Mormon Stories and what John DeLynn is doing is that he's got these long form interviews where people come on, they talk for literally hours about their story. And as people listen to these stories, they're like, me too. I felt that way too. I experienced that too. And so the benefit, say that again.
You're not alone. You're not alone.
You're not alone.
Validating.
Yeah, it's validating. It's normalizing, and it's stress reducing. And that's the beauty of Mormon Stories. But once you get through that piece, then what? Then you have, Mormon discussions, and absolutely love Bill Reel, absolutely love RFM and what they are doing. They are the meat and potatoes of, if you want resource material, you want factual information sprinkled with a lot of snark. Gotta love RFM for the snark. Love it. You want that legalism, that thinking of, where's the source material? Let's get really logical, rational, reality-based thinking. That's the place to go. If you're not good at tracking down where to look for the source material, Mormonism Live is your podcast.
Yeah.
But
But
then,
if you're not interested in the history or the deep dives and you need help,
right? Well, and that's the thing
that's
is,
where you
okay,
come in.
so what's the in between? And as we looked at a lot of these other podcasts, it was a repeat of a lot of, okay, here's the history. And then I loved what Natasha Helfer Parker was doing. You know, one of the things for me, like, I was out of the church, and when they excommunicated Natasha Helfer Parker, for me, that was I'm having my name removed today. Like, they excommunicated Natasha Helfer Parker, and I said, I'm having my name removed, because I'm doing what Natasha Helfer Parker is doing, except that her speciality is human sexuality. My speciality is trauma and anxiety and depression. That's where I have spent the majority of my expertise, is in your trauma, anxiety, depression, and treatment resistant issues. And the reason that's my speciality is because I have a kid with schizophrenia. So I have spent my career working through trauma, anxiety, depression, and treatment resistance. That's what I've done. And so for me, it was, how do I bridge that gap? Because we learn best, like, the beauty of what John DeLynn does is stories. Humans learn best by relatable stories. But then how do I bridge the gap of, here's the reality, here's the source material. Now what do I do with it? I've got all this reality, I've got the stories, now what? And so that's really what we're trying to do with Unpacking Mormonism, is I want to give you, what's the neuroscience, what's my brain doing? I want to give you the vernacular, the professional vernacular, but then I want to make it really user friendly. And the only way I, as a professional, am going to be able to break that down into a place where it's user friendly is to bring in somebody who I'm really comfortable talking to, who's really comfortable calling me out when I get a little too high into that vernacular, which is Mason, to bring it down to that audience-based place, so that I'm not talking over people's heads, to represent the audience, to say, wait a minute. And Mason's really good at me being able to say, hey, no, Mace, I actually disagree with that. Let me re-explain why. Let me help you understand why I'm not following. And then for Mason to go, no, I disagree. And then for me to be able to say, oh, wait, no, you're right. Yes, you are getting that. I misrepresented. And for us to go back and forth, so that the audience can take the story, the history, and then put it together, understand neuroscience, and know what to do with it, so that they can walk away with skills that they can apply in their life to understand why they're functioning the way they are, and then heal from what they've got going on.
That's great. I just wanted to add, they also get the benefit of seeing a couple model, talking things out and disagreeing and listening to each other. So that's great.
So what I wanted to say was just an example of kind of what we do a little bit differently. We talked about this in one of the podcasts, I don't remember what, but we were talking about just concepts that are put forward either from the scriptures or from the prophets, the leaders of the church, whatever. I remember growing up and reading the Joseph Smith translation. So in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus starts, I think it's chapter 7 of Matthew, with judge not that ye be not judged. Well, when you look at the Joseph Smith translation, Joseph Smith changed it to judge not unrighteously. And we talked about how significant a change that is in essence. And I always thought that was like, oh yeah, that makes so much more sense. Yeah, let's just not judge unrighteously. Well, who the hell knows what that means? And what you've really done, what Joseph Smith really did, was he gave us permission to judge. Whereas Jesus said, just don't do it. Joseph Smith said, it's okay as long as you're following the rules. And so we had a discussion about what it means to people and the mental health implications of allowing people to judge rather than let's just not do it. If you think about racism, if you think about LGBTQ, if you think about your children, all these things, if you can find a place, and of course it's difficult, but if you can find a place where you really and truly can see people the way they are without judging them for what they're doing, even if you think it's a behavior, like there's a lot of argument between whether being LGBTQ is genetic or biological, or if it's a choice that you're making.
Mm-hmm.
Either way, if you can come to a place where you can see that person the way that they see themselves, they might be wrong. You know, they might think that it's biological and it's actually a choice. They might think it's a choice, but it's actually biological. But that doesn't matter as much as me being able to see them the way that they see them.
Having empathy.
That has to be done without judgment. I have to be able to let go of what I think about it and just see them. And so that was kind of the conversation we had. But then what are the mental health implications? What do I benefit? What does that person benefit by me being able to get to that place? Can I be more loving? There's also the, we always hear the love the sinner, hate the sin kind of a thing. And I'm not certain you can actually do that. I know Christianity likes to talk about it. I don't know that you can actually do that. I don't think you can actually truly love someone while considering that part of what they're doing is evil. And so, and that's, of course, just my opinion. I'm not a mental health counselor. It's just the way that I see things. But I think that what it does is it allows us to not truly engage in somebody's life. It allows us to be reticent. It allows us to step back and say, well, yeah, of course I love you, but I can't let you into my house because you're drinking coffee or because you're gay now. And it allows us to be exclusive while still being morally correct, at least in our heads.
Or
like,
morally
I don't agree
superior.
that that's the case. Right. I don't agree that that's the case, but in our heads, well, I'm still on the moral high ground. I love you. I just don't accept what you're doing. And I just don't see that as really working out the way that religion wants it to.
Yeah.
Right.
I wanted to ask, Sarah, you sent me what some of your top episodes were. And are these like your top downloads that you had sent?
Yeah. So they're the ones that have the top listens.
Okay.
2 of them are...
Yeah,
go ahead.
do a quick dive in, and then also I'm interested in the kind of commentary that you've gotten that kind of shows what made these ones so popular with your listeners.
Yeah, so I'm gonna have to see if I can remember which ones they are.
So
I know
I've got it in front of me. Yeah, so there's
if you can just give me the titles of
your
those.
brain is not your enemy.
Okay,
and then school by feelings.
All right.
Okay,
so
yeah.
your brain
those
is
are like
not your...
those are like number 2 and number 3. So one of the reasons they
Yeah,
have the most
really.
downloads is they've been around longer than any of the others.
Probably.
Actually, so those 2 have like 5 times more downloads than any of the others.
Nice.
Like hundreds of more. And the reason, and we've got lots and lots of comments on them. And the reason is because they are super heavy in the psychoeducational piece. So like episode number 2 is Your Brain is Not Your Enemy. I am teaching the relationship between the frontal cortex and the amygdala and why our amygdala hijacks frontal cortex functioning. So why we're responding from a fear-based thing, why we're identifying things as dangerous, how that compromises logical and rational reasoning. And I'm doing that on what I call like my 2nd grade level. So I'm breaking that down to a level that I explain it to my kids so that they understand, hey, when your autistic brother or sister is throwing a tantrum and not cooperating in the way that you want them to, getting frustrated with them actually makes things worse. I'm explaining it to them and in that manner. And what the commentary that I'm getting back on that episode is, this makes so much sense. This has helped me respond to my children so much better. I'm not getting as frustrated in my marriage. But I also add in that scriptural spin. And this is not necessarily just Mormon scripture. This is Christian scripture. The school thy feelings is the same idea, except it's the emotional thing. So we are talking about things like how scripture teaches that anger means that Satan is control of you. And we're talking about, no, anger is your brain's way of saying something is going on that doesn't feel good. And we need to listen to that in order to make informed decisions and navigate your life differently. So those are the 2 that are actually like my 2nd and 3rd session. And I think that that's why we have gotten so many listens, is because those 2 episodes, so episode number 2 and episode number 3, are literally my second and third session that I would have with any client. And I say that because when you enter therapy with me, I have a curriculum that occurs that I won't enter counseling with you until you have at least a couple of psychoeducational pieces with me, because I can't do therapy with you
Right.
until you have at least a couple of neuroscience lessons in place. So that way, when we start poking the beast and you start having triggers in session, you know what to do about it. And so in those 2 episodes, I also teach you some basic breathing techniques and whatnot to help self-soothe. I teach you why your brain resists those breathings, because deep breathing exercises in mental health are a little bit cliche. And I hear people all the time, oh, deep breathing doesn't work for me. I don't know if I explain in those as to why there's resistance or not. I'd have to go back and listen to them. But I think that's why those 2 sessions literally have hundreds more
Free
downloads,
therapy,
because they are
basically.
free therapy. And then the other thing is that we give our email and the Daisy Girl Communications phone number out to people in those sessions, so that if you have questions, you can contact me directly and I will point you to other resources to help you.
And we'll have those in the show notes as well.
Absolutely.
For this episode.
Yeah, absolutely. So they are free therapy. So those are why those 2 are so popular, is because they are free psychoeducational therapy that I think every person on the planet can benefit from. And they are evidence-based. They are not Sarah's thoughts and opinion. These are founded in neuroscience. So, all right.
Perfect. So the next one was, is the prophet a narcissist? And then, so that one seems kind of more specifically focused on the church. And then real quick, I'm just going to say the other 2 titles. These ones seem more personal. Episode 31, I am not broken. We are not broken. And episode 50, perpetual inadequacy. What is it good for? Absolutely nothing. So, yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm going to pause real quick. Actually, do we want to go into the narcissist? Oh, I'm sorry, Mason, go ahead.
I just said, if that doesn't bring a song to your head, you're dead inside. Okay.
Yeah.
What is it good for? Sorry.
So most of our episodes, we talk about a lot about Mormonism, because it's Mason's and my experiential expertise. Because when it comes to religion, we can talk about Catholicism or Seventh-day Adventists or Jehovah's Witnesses or Islam all day long. We have no experiential expertise in those religions because we've never been an active participant in those faith-based. I mean, all I have on those faiths is an academic understanding because I studied them in my cultural competency classes, which means I have 12 weeks worth of book learning on them. That's nothing. And
you have
so
the first discussion, right? You just have just a quiet little, this is what we want you to know essentially about our religion.
Right. So on is the prophet a narcissist? We break down some of the narcissistic tendencies. And I use that word on purpose, of prophet and President Russell M. Nelson, who I believe most likely has narcissistic personality disorder. However, I can't diagnose him because he's not my patient. But there are definitely some things that I would say most people go, same thing with like Donald Trump. There are definitely some things that Donald Trump does that makes me go, pretty certain the guy has narcissistic personality disorder, but I cannot diagnose him because he is not my patient. And I just, you can't, because also what the media shows and what they show in public is different than what they show in private. And I would need to be able to have them in my clinic for like 12 weeks or more to give that accurate diagnosis. But in that episode, as the prophet a narcissist, I also talk about healthy narcissistic like behaviors that every human demonstrates at times. We talk about how narcissistic tendencies can keep us motivated and driven to accomplish lots of things, how it can be healthy and how it's not healthy. And so it's, again, very psychoeducational. It got a lot of listens because Mason's aunt, who was serving a mission in Africa at the time, went nuts about it. and blew up our Facebook pages. So there was a lot of family drama on that one. And there were some family drama episodes afterwards that made it a little bit exciting. But I think one of the reasons why that one got so many listens was, number one, people were very interested in learning whether or not the prophet was a narcissist, but also because narcissistic personality disorder, which we talked about in the episode, is really trendy right now. And we are over-diagnosing men, especially with narcissistic personality disorder, when most of our men do not have it. And we really wanted to break down tendencies versus a true disorder. We also recently did an episode called Men Are Not Toxic. Men are wounded, because we really want to make sure that our men are not getting erased in the feminist movement, which right now our men are being erased. And so we talked about that, hey, just because of these tendencies does not mean that every man on the planet who has these tendencies has the disorder. And so that, go ahead, Jean. I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
I said I saw the Barbie movie, so I know a little bit more about that.
Great. It was a
good for you. Good for you.
Fabulous movie. The I am not broken, we are not broken. As I have gone on a search for a new church community, which has been very difficult. I'm kind of agnostic. I believe that there's something out there, but can't really define it. One of the things I'm struggling with on my journey to finding a community is every church I've gone to continues to tell me I'm broken. We're not. And so in that one, I talked about the fact that we are not broken. We don't need something to come in and heal us, that our brain is functioning the way it's supposed to. So again, it's highly psychoeducational. And that one I think I did on my own. I don't think Mason was in that one. And then the last one, that perpetual inadequacy one, was the end one on our cult series that we did over the summer. Our cult series, where we kind of we did a deep dive into Luna's book, because their book was like is like the resource encyclopedic book on cult dynamics, but it's not super user friendly in, okay, now how do I identify it when I'm acting like a cult leader, because we all do it sometimes, when I'm practicing undue influence and when others are practicing undue influence on me. So we really broke that down. And that one was our kind of our closing episode. And so it's that, why am I never enough? What's going on for me? And so those are kind of those episodes, and that's what they're each about.
See, I got to raise my hand when I want to talk.
Yeah.
I think that one of the things that's always been important to me is that I used to say this when I was teaching gospel doctrine, when I was bishop, that the goal of a good gospel doctrine teacher, or a good teacher in general, ought to be to make themselves irrelevant. In other words, I don't want to teach you a concept. I want to teach you how to learn the concepts on your own. And same thing with the counselor. Like, no counselor wants to, well, no good counselor, no good counselor wants to be with a certain client for the rest of their lives. Some of them will need years and years of therapy. Like, I'm not knocking that at all, but you don't want to be with your clients forever. You want to teach them what they need to know to be able to manage things on their own. And the real difference between wanting to make yourself irrelevant is, if you compare that to churches in general, and certainly high demand religions, there is absolutely zero aspect of that. They want you dependent on the church. And even concepts like the atonement of Jesus Christ, which used to be so liberating and just so much power inside of it, I see now as, I'm completely dependent on that idea. If I believe that Jesus died for my sins, I'm completely dependent on that idea. I'm constantly repenting. I'm constantly not good enough. I'm never going to make the cut, because Jesus is always there making up for my failings. And so the difference there being that if you're really trying to teach somebody, you're hoping that eventually they're good on their own. I do anesthesia. I don't want to constantly be doing anesthesia on somebody because they're not getting better. The idea is, we do anesthesia, you have a surgery, you don't need us anymore. The idea from a counselor, a teacher, I'm going to teach you some concepts in the hopes that you don't need me anymore. I'm going to teach high school in the hopes that you're going to graduate. You won't need me anymore. But a religion does not do that. A religion always wants you there, always says that you need to be there. So it's not even we want you here. We have a good community. It's you need to be here because what we have to offer you is dependent on your involvement.
Should be a guide to self-discovery, not here's the way everything is.
Yes.
Right. And our goal with our podcast is use us for as long as you need us. Come back if you need a tune-up. But we want you to come. We want you to feel safe and welcome to discover the skills and tools that you need to heal. Take those skills and tools and share them with the world as much as you need. And then go live your life and be happy. And heal, be better, be your true authentic self. We want to make sure that we are giving our listeners evidence-based interventions that you can utilize on your own. And then we also help our listeners identify when they might need to take something they've heard on our podcast to their own personal care providers to fine-tune them for their own personal issues, and then go and live. So yeah, our goal
I was going to
is
ask if you have an episode on that, or if I'm thinking the same track as you, like, do you have an episode about, especially with the stuff that's come out with Jody Hildebrand and you know, where we have unethical therapists who have a lot of influence, and it can be kind of scary. So so it sounds like this is kind of a common theme throughout the podcast, is giving these kinds of tools, but I am wondering do you have a standalone episode where you talk about this is how to look for a therapist? These are the good flags, I guess, the green flags.
We actually did it.
There's the red flags, and how do you advocate for yourself?
Yeah, we actually did it in response to something John Larson said on a Mormon Stories episode. John Larson said something along the lines of, don't get a life coach, only get a doctorate level professional. And I was like, oh, actually, I disagree with that. A life coach can be a huge benefit. A master's level counselor can be great. And there are really shitty doctorate level counselors out there. There are phenomenal LDS counselors out there, and there are really shitty LDS counselors out there. There are phenomenal master's level counselors or shitty master's level counselors out there. Let me see if I can find that one, or Mason, maybe you could find it faster than me.
And we can put it in the show notes.
Yeah, we went through like what do you want? Because and Mason's sister actually had said something to me once. Mason's sister has this block where she told me once, I can't sit with a counselor, but life coaching is a great format for me. And I kind of chuckled. I didn't say anything to her because the message would not have been received. Like, know your audience. We don't want to tell people, hey, life coaching is actually psychoeducation. There's so much overlap between life coaching and counseling. It really comes down to the education and the interventions that your life coach or your counselor is teaching you. There's a lot of crossover there, and there's a lot of differences too. And so if you've got a
education versus therapy.
Yeah. Life coaching is more about so it's called motivational interviewing is what we call it in counseling. So how well I'm motivating you in the way that I'm asking you questions, education, the education that I'm providing you, and the way that I'm able to show up for you in your life. And then ethics. Ethics is huge. So there's going to be really terrible life coaches in your life, and there's going to be phenomenal life coaches in your life. And some life coaches are going to be better for you than counselors. Like, it's really 80% of the efficacy of therapy is the relationship that you have with the therapist. In fact, the whole idea of confessing your sins. So we talk about confessing your sins. When we come to a therapeutic model, confession is actually a huge therapeutic piece of lifting the burden of holding on to something. The way that, and Brene Brown talks about this, but the only time that confession is therapeutically beneficial is if the person that you are confessing to will honor your confidence. Now, the issue with confessing to a bishop is that your confidence is never actually honored, because in a bishopric, the bishop is always going to consult with his counselors and the ward council. So I cheated on my husband twice. And I had a lot of chastity issues when I was in high school. For more information, read my book, Trauma Bonded. I write quite a bit about
We will also
that.
link that below.
Yeah. So
it's episode 12, by the way.
Thank you, Mason. Episode 12 is the one where I talk. What is the name of that episode, Mason?
Oh gosh, life coach or counselor? Who do I choose?
There you go. Where we talk about that.
Total
so
squirrel.
Anyway,
Total squirrel. It is now easier for me to just Google the episodes than look through Spotify. So we've been around long enough now that I can't scroll through Spotify anymore. So that's a good thing. Carry on.
So, but the whole confession thing with the bishop, the challenge is that, when I was a youth, the bishop had to tell my young women's leaders that I wasn't allowed to pray, that they shouldn't ask me those things, that I wasn't allowed to hold certain callings. When in 2000, right, when I was, well, and it's, according to Mormons, not public because they do it in private and they don't tell anybody. But when I was the primary president, I then told my counselors, don't ask this person. And I didn't tell them why, but the assumption is, and so that's not in confidence. But when you confess what you have done to somebody that you trust implicitly not to tell, or only to disclose in an appropriate environment that the confessor has control over, that is incredibly healing. So the idea of confessing vulnerable things, that is very healing. But the person doing the confessing has to have control over who then has that information. And
I've recently come across a way of how you can decide if your life coach is maybe not the best for you, is if she wants to move into your house.
Yeah, that's, Jody Hildebrandt definitely set the bar very, very low. Also, based on how much she's charging, because apparently her house was like $3 million. I'm going to tell you right now, I'm not making anywhere near that money on my private practice. Not even close. As an independent provider in my own practice. Yeah, no.
I guess like doing a job professionally maybe isn't as lucrative as fleecing people unethically. It's amazing how much more money you can make, I guess, if you just toss that out the window.
I think that's called extortion. I think there's a word for that, right? Extortion. Yeah. I think that's a good word.
If we go back to the bishop thing, I was thinking even if it's not with confession, even if it's not to the bishop, but an LDS referred therapist like Jody was, that control is still lost and the privacy is still lost because they have you sign a waiver, usually to allow your approved therapist to talk with your bishop. I know I've done that in the past. I've used LDS Family Services,
which is interesting because I used to be an LDS approved therapist, but the only waiver that my clients ever signed was the same waiver that you would sign for an insurance company, meaning that the only information I was allowed to give the bishop was that they were coming for session, so that way I could bill, because basically I can't send you a bill unless I'm like, hey, they showed up, so here's your bill, which is just assumed when I send the bill.
Right.
And then
so I'm wondering, maybe I didn't sign something,
and then treatment,
or maybe
compliance.
That was my understanding.
Right. And then treatment compliance, which just means this patient is improving or this patient is not improving. And then for my clients, if I sent anything outside of, I feel that the client is improving, or I feel like the client has stalled, or I feel like the client is not improving, which I still shared that with the client. If I wrote anything else to the bishop on my clients, the client read it first. I did not send anything. My clients,
that's interesting.
Nothing.
Is that new, do you think? Or
that's,
is that, like, when was that?
That's HIPAA law. That's HIPAA. Yeah,
I guess what what I'm wondering
you're
is
not
because that was,
supposed to disclose to a religious leader.
yeah,
And I don't know if that's a misnomer or if bishops and therapists are just misunderstanding. But like
that was my understanding, like as a patient, was that. And so if I didn't sign something, I think maybe at least in conversations, I understood. And of course I was okay with it at the time because I was a believing member, and I felt that, yeah, if there was something that came out in therapy that my therapist thought my bishop should know, then I trusted that. So that was my understanding. But that's interesting that you bring that up. Yeah.
Nope.
So
The
it
bishop
might
is the
be
end all.
Right.
Right,
It
the
doesn't
same-
matter who's
something that's
paying.
changed. Yeah.
Right. The only paper when my clients would sign that paper, it's the same release that they get for the insurance. So like when I disclose to your, unless it's Medicaid or Medicare, which that's a whole other beast, but for any third party reimbursement, it is the billing code, which is like a 90837,
Right.
90834, which is I spent 60 minutes and that's why I'm billing this.
Yeah.
So basically it's
Well,
just permission to bill, and that is how long I spent with them, what the diagnostic code is. So like what your diagnosis is, which I never shared that with the bishop because they don't care.
not their business. Yeah.
The data service. Yeah, it's just
But
the same stuff I would
conceivably,
send to an
'cause-
insurance company.
Yeah. If we're talking about unethical therapists, though, conceivably they could have like a phone call with a bishop. So that would not be in writing. That would not be, necessarily tracked.
That requires a
Uh,
release of information, which should then outline what I'm allowed to talk to the bishop about. So if you
well,
signed
yeah, if you're being
if you
ethical.
if you signed a release of information, then you're agreeing to that. And the only time I would get a release of information was when my bishop was giving clients really bad advice. And then I would say, hey, I'd like to talk to your bishop. So like one time I had a bishop give this client advice. Like, so the female had been sexually assaulted multiple times. And the bishop was telling the client, like, hey, you just need to like let your spouse hold your hand. You just need to let him like put his arms around you. You just need to let him hug you. And eventually you'll get used to it. And I was like, no. No, stop. And she was like, but every time we go to the bishop, this is what he says. And I was like, can you sign a release of information? And I'm going to educate your bishop on what not to say. And the only thing I'm going to disclose is that. And so they signed that release of information, and all it said on it was other, and it said provide psychoeducation on sexual assault protocols. That's all it said. And so it was, hey, I've talked to this client and I'd like to provide you with some information. Are you open to this? And the bishop said yes. And I provided it. And the bishop was like, oh my gosh, I had no idea. That makes so much sense. And I said, hey, since I'm working with this client, can you maybe just not provide any counsel at all and let me do my job? And then if you have any questions, just give me a call and we'll go from there. And he was like, yes. And it was done. He felt horrible. Like he wasn't trying to do, he said, I was providing them the same counselor a counselor provided me and my wife. And I was like, great. Just remember that what a counselor provides you and your wife is specific to your situation. It doesn't translate to everybody. And it was done.
Well, the danger there is that if you create a system where the bishop or the leader is essentially the end all kind of in this situation, you give them an incredible amount of authority without the education that needs to go along with that. So you can provide terrible counsel, but because you're told that the Lord is the one that's telling you what to say, you're feeling good about this, but you're feeling good about it because it makes sense to you. It's not because God is telling you what to do. God more likely would be telling, God more likely would be telling you, you have no place talking about this with this person. Send them to somebody who knows what they're talking about. And so we set up this system where there's so much potential for abuse because we have people in authority that don't have a clue, most of the time, don't have a clue what it is that they need to say or not say. Like even that situation, like, the person is going to a therapist about these issues, but you still want to tell them what you think about it. I mean, that just, there's no logic there. It all comes from a sense of authority and privilege that unless you step away from it and look at the situation from the outside, usually you won't even have a clue that you're screwing things up.
I just want to make sure. So I just want to make sure we kind of wrap up to something that was said at the beginning, which was about your LDS clients stalling and having this block. So what was the block? Is it the church, or is it something else? Whereas, because if it is the church, I would think that would be something that if a believing member is coming to you and you're saying that is the block, that they, you know what I mean, that they wouldn't be amenable to that, or is the block something else that believing members can work with to get through, so that even if they're holding on to their faith and they're keeping faith, they can still make progress in therapy?
Yeah.
I
Jean,
was
what
gonna
was your
say,
question?
I wonder, my wonderment from non-professional, position, and just thinking about it, if the block, to me, it seems like it would be, life is terrible now, but someday in heaven, everything will be all worked out. And so I can just let the horribleness that I'm experiencing just keep on happening. Is that part of it?
I think that the block, I agree with you, Jean, and this is just my professional opinion, but it is opinion. I don't have any evidence-based research, but as I've talked to other, because I ended up seeking professional, oh shoot, Mason, what's it called when you talk to other professionals? Because I checked in with, thank you, professional consultation. I ended up going to somebody who had been practicing much longer than me and saying, what is going on? And she laughed and she said, hey, Sarah, we see this with Jehovah's Witnesses. We see this with Seventh-day Adventists. She goes, we see this with Mormons. And really what I think it is that the dissonance is so strong, that there is so much fear to do things differently, that we get caught up in faith, that it is, I am going to lay this at the feet of God and I don't have to worry about it. And one of the things that you have to do in therapy to heal is what we call lean in to the discomfort. And you have to explore and see things from different perspectives. And the fear of doing that and seeing things differently than we've been taught from the time we were itty bitty is so strong in Mormonism that we don't have any experience in doing it. So doing it in the therapeutic session is absolutely terrifying. And as soon as we start to feel that uncomfortable sensation that we need to grow, that we need to change, we thought stop, we shift, and we say, nope, we're going to ignore that. And I'm just going to have faith and I'm just going to keep driving on. And then we get that cognitive bias and we feel good and we feel the spirit and, oh, I'm getting this calming sensation. I'm on the right path. And then that's immediately followed by, I'm still anxious. I'm still depressed. But you know what? I'm doing things the right way. So this is eventually all just going to work out. And in the next life, I'm going to be rewarded. One of the things that I work on with my clients on a regular basis is you have to get familiar with feeling uncomfortable, because we can't change, we can't grow, we cannot get to the other side of healthy. We can't get to, not the other side of healthy, because then that's unhealthy. We cannot get to a place of healthy until we push through things, until we get through the uncomfortable emotions. So I want you to think of the book Sapiens. Bill Reel talks about it a lot. It is incredibly normal for us as humans to identify something different as bad. So for example, I'm going to use race as an example. If I, and we'll talk about, not millions of years ago, but thousands of years ago, if I have been, brought up in an environment in the northern hemisphere of the world, and I have never seen anybody with darker melanin in their skin, and then I've migrated south closer to the equator, where people are naturally darker because their bodies have evolved that way in order for survival. My initial brain response is that's different, therefore it's bad. Why? Because evolution makes me question things that look different for my survival. That's a natural, normal, human part of my brain. That's how our species has survived. And frankly, the darker melanin people, so the Black, the natives, the Hispanic, equator people, are going to look at the lighter skinned people also with a little bit of suspicion and fear as well. Who are these people? We're gonna be suspicious. What's going on? That's natural. That's normal. If we do not say, okay, let's watch it for a little while, let's gather some data, let's see what they do, let's see how they live, let's just watch and whatnot, let's get curious about this. If we just start attacking each other, of course we're going to then follow that loop of they're dangerous, because if I attack them, they're going to attack me back, and now I've fulfilled this loop that they are dangerous, and then I'm creating this racism because I attack them, they attack me. We kidnap them, they kidnap me. We enslave them, they enslave me. We created this racist community by the way we treated each other before our evolution was ready to be more open-minded and recognize we're all human. We just look different, but on the inside, our brains work the same ways. We all have the same amygdala. We all have the same frontal cortex. You know, under the same circumstances of danger, we respond the same way, which also means under the same systems of safety, we respond the same way. And if we're all safe, we can live harmoniously together. We can, and we can love each other, and we can embrace each other. And we see this across the LGBT plus community. You can be trans, and when trans people are safe and non-trans people are safe, we can live harmoniously together. And it's beautiful, and it's glorious. And I know this because guess what? I have 7 children. We are a multi-ethnic family. We are a multi-gender family. We are a multi-gender fluidity family. We are a multi-sexual orientation family. And it's beautiful. I love my 7 children, and we are all very different from each other. And there is so much love in my home. But it is natural for us to identify things that are different as dangerous, and to have what we call an amygdala brain response of fear. Therefore, fight, flight, freeze, fawn, meaning I'm going to respond as though this is dangerous and I'm going to attack it. I'm going to run away from it. I'm going to freeze and have no response, or I'm going to try and please it and placate it. Right. So when you're in the therapy room and you've been taught that any discomfort, that fight, flight, freeze, fawn response, because I've been taught that there's only one right way to be, and anything outside of that is dangerous or bad. And I'm not used to having things outside of my belief system. I'm told that anything outside of my belief system is dangerous or bad. You know, don't trust the non-believer. What is it that Nelson just said? Don't take counsel from the non-believer.
Never take counsel for someone who doesn't believe.
I think the Middle East is having problems with that situation too, with God involved.
Right. I'm not allowed to associate with it. I've got to keep it at a distance. I love it, but there's got to be some safety there. Love it, but don't accept it. You know, there's always that distance. Then when I get in that counseling room, I have no experience managing that amygdala response. And it doesn't matter how much my counselor helps me experience some discomfort. I can only do, where's my mirror? Here it is. This much. And then I stall out. because anything beyond this much, I'm in the influence of Satan. And if I go anything beyond this, I'm going to lose everything. And I cannot progress because I will lose my family. I'm going to lose my salvation. I'm going to lose my community. The threat of loss is too great. And when I've got that much at stake, my brain cannot relax enough to lean in. That's what we like to say in therapy, but lean in just means relax enough to experience it
like that,
for
Jean.
a prolonged period of time. I just don't allow myself to do it so that my brain won't. Thanks, Mace. And
It's
I don't.
cliche
And then I solve.
enough, and not dealing with the difficult things is cliche enough that there's actually a song in the play, The Book of Mormon, that talks about it. Shut it down. Right? I forget. I think it's called Shut It
Turn
Down.
it off.
Shut it off.
Like
Yeah.
turn it off.
Turn
Yeah,
it off.
Turn
we
it off.
don't
Yeah.
we don't go there. We don't deal
Like
with
a light
that
switch.
because
Like a light
exactly.
switch.
It's
Turn it off.
cliche enough for the church that, you know, you have Thomas S. Monson talking about how anger in every setting is bad. Well, if a normal emotion that I feel means that Satan now has control, I've completely taken away the ability for that person to manage it, to deal with it, to understand it. And it will come back.
Internal.
Right.
Well, and it's not
and it
just
will come
anger.
back. I'll get angry again. So obviously Satan's under my control again. I better go repent. I need the church again. Like
Right,
the
but what I
only people
see-
that gain, oh, hold on just a second. The only people that gain from keeping people separate, you know, talking about Israel, race, the only people that gain from that are the people that have the power. The people in the situations don't gain from that. They would be much better off if there was conversation, if there was understanding. If you could go talk to a Black person, you would realize they're just like you. Their experiences are different, but they're just like you. If the Gaza Strip could have open communication with Israel, you would see that your similarities are far greater than your differences. But you can't do that because the people in power need you to need them.
Right. And it's not just anger. It's any emotion that is uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Because what you've learned in Mormonism, it's not that anger is bad, it's that discomfort is bad.
Okay, so far what I'm seeing that you have to bring to a potential audience, I like what Jean said, where we've got you with your expertise, Sarah, and then we've got Mason to kind of represent us in interview, us lay people in understanding these concepts. Free therapy, to be able to kind of unpack these things. I guess maybe a little bit of marriage counseling. I think this sounds like it would be good for other couples who, especially as you guys started out as mixed faith and learning to work together. And then you also have the additional perspective of having children with special needs and, mental health issues. And then also, I think just as far as women, like struggling with infertility, that's something, that the women experiencing that can, I think, relate to you on. Is there anything else?
You make it sound like we've gone through a lot of crap in our lives, maybe. I just throw it all out there, okay?
Trauma.
Discomfort.
Yeah, well,
I would say trauma.
So yeah,
I would say any form of trauma. Really, we are trying to target anybody who has experienced any form of trauma in their life and how they can heal from that and come out on the other side more empowered and maintain their authenticity, whether or not they choose to stay in their religion or faith-based practices or on the outside.
Relationship, whatever it is you want to stay in.
Because with the title of your podcast, it just occurred to me that it could be Unpacking Mormonism could sound like a deconstruction podcast where it's about deconstructing Mormonism, but it's not. That's not what it is. I'm getting it. It's like just unpacking the trauma, I guess, or the unhealthy things that are maybe blocking us and preventing us from being able to make progress and move forward in our lives and relationships. So the Unpacking Mormonism, I guess it's therapy based. It's personal progress based. It's not leaving the religion. So is that right? So
Yes.
it's how safe, like, I guess on a scale of 1 to 10, how safe is your podcast for believing Mormons, would you say?
8 out of 10. I would say, when I use the word unpacking, I like to think of I've come home from a really long trip, or maybe I'm unpacking my house after a move. I'm going through all of the boxes and I'm like, I don't really need this anymore, so I'm going to toss it, but I need to maybe replace it with this. And I'm not talking about belief systems as much as I'm talking about the way we think about things, patterns of behavior, communication patterns. We're talking about skills, not religious beliefs. So yes, unpacking is very much a therapeutic term, whereas deconstruction is more a belief system. Unpacking is therapeutic. Yeah.
Turning trauma into triumphs.
Ooh, I like that. I might steal that.
Write that down. Yeah.
Our goal at Unpacking Mormonism and Other Religious Trauma is not to convince anybody to stay or leave their religious system. It's to help them live healthier lives in whatever path they choose.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Okay. I'd like to thank everybody for listening right now. I'd like to thank Sarah and Mason. I want everybody to check out their podcast. And we're just so excited to be able to talk with them today. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for having us.
Awesome. Okay.